He's worth tens of billions, yet ordinary Americans are footing the bill. When asked about it, he called feeding families budget discipline. But what happened next will shock you. The Senate Oversight hearing room felt different that Thursday morning. There was an electricity in the air, the kind that comes right before a storm breaks. Senators shuffled papers, aides whispered nervously, and journalists sat with fingers poised over keyboards, sensing that something memorable was about to happen. At the witness table sat Elon Musk, the world's richest man, looking characteristically unbothered in his casual blazer and t-shirt combo. A studied informality designed to project that he was above the formality of government procedure. He'd been called to testify about his company's federal contracts and his recent advisory role on government efficiency. A position that had raised eyebrows, given that his own businesses were some of the largest recipients of government subsidies in American history. But Musk had come ready with his usual talking points about innovation, efficiency, and the necessity of cutting wasteful spending. He just finished a rambling answer about how government programs that help struggling Americans were bankrupting the country and needed discipline. The word hung in the air, discipline, as if families choosing between rent and groceries just weren't being disciplined enough. That's when Representative Jasmine Crockett, sitting several seats down from the committee chairman, leaned forward into her microphone. She'd been quietly taking notes during Musk's testimony, her expression giving nothing away. But anyone who'd been following her career knew that quiet preparation was when she was most dangerous. Musk, she began, her Texas accent clear and her tone deceptively polite. I want to make sure I understand your position correctly. You just said that federal programs providing food assistance, housing support, and healthcare subsidies to low-income Americans represent wasteful spending that needs to be cut. Is that an accurate summary? Musk nodded, seemingly pleased to explain further. I'm saying we need to look at government efficiency holistically. We can't keep funding programs that create dependency. Instead of Crockett cut him off smoothly, not rudely, but with the precision of someone who wasn't going to let a billionaire filibuster his way out of accountability. I appreciate that, Mr. Musk, but I'm asking you to confirm, do you believe that SNAP benefits, Section 8 housing vouchers, and Medicaid represent wasteful spending that should be reduced or eliminated? Musk shifted slightly, perhaps recognizing the trap, but unable to avoid it. I think those programs could be run more efficiently. Yes, and we should evaluate whether they're the best use of taxpayer dollars. Perfect, Crockett said, pulling out a folder, that signature move that always signaled she'd done her homework. Let me share some information about taxpayer dollars with you, Mr. Musk, because I think we need to talk about efficiency and waste in a more comprehensive way. Before we dive into how Jasmine Crockett systematically dismantled Elon Musk's entire argument about government waste by exposing the billions in subsidies his companies receive, and left him unable to answer her final devastating question about when making billions excused letting millions go hungry, make sure you hit that subscribe button. You're about to see one of the most brutal takedowns of billionaire hypocrisy ever captured on C-SPAN. And trust me, the question viewers are going to be left asking is, will tech billionaires ever actually be held accountable? Drop a comment and tell us what you think. Crockett opened her folder and pulled out the first document. Mr. Musk, let's talk about taxpayer dollars and your companies. According to federal contract data, SpaceX has received approximately $15.3 billion in government contracts over the past decade. Is that number accurate? Musk nodded, clearly preparing his defense. Those are contracts for services rendered. Congresswoman, SpaceX launches satellites, supplies the International Space Station. Crockett held up her hand. I'm not questioning the services, Mr. Musk. I'm establishing the facts. Your companies receive substantial government funding. Let's continue. She pulled out another document. Tesla, your electric vehicle company, has benefited from approximately $2.4 billion in federal and state tax credits and subsidies since its founding. Additionally, your customers have received over $3 billion in federal EV tax credits when purchasing Tesla vehicles. That's $5.4 billion in taxpayer subsidies directly benefiting Tesla. Would you dispute those numbers? Musk's expression tightened slightly. Those are tax incentives designed to encourage clean energy adoption. They're available to all EV manufacturers, not just... Again, Mr. Musk, I'm not disputing their purpose. I'm establishing facts. Crockett moved to her next page. Solar City, which Tesla acquired, received approximately $97 million in federal grants and tax credits before the acquisition. Starlink has received $85 million in FCC subsidies to expand rural broadband. And that's not even counting the indirect subsidies, the federal research and development your companies benefit from, the infrastructure that supports your operations, the educated workforce trained in public universities that you employ. She looked up from her documents. When you add it all up, your various companies have received well over $10 billion in direct government subsidies, tax breaks, and contracts. And that's a conservative estimate that doesn't include state and local incentives. Mr. Musk leaned forward. Congresswoman, you're conflating government contracts with subsidies. SpaceX provides services that Crockett didn't let him finish. Mr. Musk, I was a civil rights attorney before coming to Congress. I understand the difference between contracts and subsidies. But let me ask you this. When you received those billions in taxpayer support, subsidies, tax breaks, contracts, whatever term you prefer, did you call that wasteful spending? The question landed like a punch. Musk paused, clearly calculating his response. Those investments have generated returns. They've advanced technology, created jobs. So, government spending on your companies is investment. But government spending on feeding hungry families is waste. Crockett's voice hadn't risen, but the sharpness was unmistakable. Help me understand the logic, Mr. Musk. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like government spending is only wasteful when it helps poor people, but it's investment when it helps billionaires. The hearing room erupted in murmurs. Several senators leaned forward, clearly engaged now. Musk's usual confident demeanor had cracked slightly, replaced by visible irritation. Crockett pressed forward, not giving him time to regroup. Let's talk about those families you think represent wasteful spending, she said, pulling out more documents. The average SNAP benefit, food stamps, is about $95 per person per month. That's $6.50 a day to feed someone. The average Section 8 housing voucher is about $1,200 per month. Medicaid covers basic health care for people who can't afford insurance. She looked directly at Musk. You personally, Mr. Musk, have a net worth that fluctuates, but it's currently estimated around $250 billion. That's billion with a B. You made more money in a single day last month, $12 billion when Tesla stock jumped, than the entire annual SNAP budget for the state of Texas, which feeds 3.6 million people. She let that sink in. You made more in one day than it costs to feed 3.6 million people for a year. And you're sitting here telling this committee that we need to cut food assistance because it's wasteful. Musk tried to respond, Congresswoman, personal wealth and government budgets are completely different. Are they? Crockett challenged. Because here's what I'm seeing, Mr. Musk. Your wealth was built in significant part on government subsidies and contracts. Taxpayers funded your success. And now that you've made your billions, you're advocating for cutting the very types of government programs that help the people who funded your rise. That seems like pulling the ladder up behind you. She wasn't done. Let's talk about government efficiency, since that's your expertise now. She continued, her tone sharpening. You're advising the administration on cutting costs. You've specifically targeted social programs. But let me ask you about efficiency in your own operations. She pulled out another document. In 2023, SpaceX's Starship prototype exploded on its test launch. That explosion damaged a state park, sent debris across a protected wildlife area, and required federal environmental cleanup. The cost to taxpayers? Approximately Was that efficient use of taxpayer resources? Musk bristled. That's research and development. Failures are part of innovation, and food stamps are part of keeping Americans alive. Mr. Musk, healthcare subsidies are part of keeping Americans healthy. Housing assistance is part of keeping Americans housed. Why is your failure costing taxpayers $150 million considered acceptable R&D, but a single mother receiving $200 a month in food assistance considered wasteful spending? The comparison was devastating. Several committee members were nodding. Journalists were typing frantically. The hearing had become something Musk clearly hadn't prepared for. An actual accountability session, rather than a friendly conversation about innovation. Crockett moved to her next point. building her case systematically. Let's talk about the tariffs you've advocated for, Mr. Musk. You've publicly supported tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles and solar panels. Those tariffs raise prices for American consumers. They make clean energy more expensive. They make vehicles more expensive, but they benefit Tesla because they reduce your competition. She looked up from her notes. So when you advocate for tariffs that raise costs for ordinary Americans while reducing competition for your companies, is that wasteful spending? Or is that just policy that benefits billionaires at the expense of working families? Musk's response was defensive. Trade policy is complex. You can't reduce it to, "I'm not reducing anything, Mr. Musk. I'm pointing out that you advocate for policies that benefit your bottom line while opposing policies that help families afford food and housing. That's not complexity. That's hypocrisy." The word hung in the air. Several senators looked uncomfortable, not because Crockett was wrong, but because she was right in a way that was uncomfortable to acknowledge. The system was set up to give billions to billionaires while nickel and diming benefits for poor families. And Musk's testimony had inadvertently highlighted that reality. Crockett pulled out her final set of documents. "Let me share some stories with you, Mr. Musk, because I think we need to ground this discussion in reality." She held up the first letter. This is from Maria Gonzalez. "In my district, she works 2 jobs. One as a home health aide, one at a grocery store. Between both jobs, she makes about $28,000 a year. She has 3 kids. Her SNAP benefits provide about $450 a month to help feed those kids. Without that assistance, Maria told me she'd have to choose between feeding her children and keeping the lights on." Crockett looked at Musk. "You're advocating for cutting Maria's $450 a month in food assistance because of budget discipline, but your companies have received over $10 billion in taxpayer support. Maria pays taxes too, Mr. Musk. Every time she buys groceries, she pays sales tax. Every paycheck, she pays payroll tax. Part of her tax dollars went to subsidizing Tesla and SpaceX, and now you want to cut the assistance that keeps her kids fed." She moved to another letter. This is from James Washington, a disabled veteran in Dallas. He receives Medicaid because his service-connected injuries prevent him from working full-time, and he can't afford private insurance. The medications he needs cost about $800 a month. Medicaid covers them. You want to cut Medicaid spending. Should James just stop taking his medications, Mr. Musk? Should he have to choose between treating his disabilities and paying rent? Musk shifted uncomfortably. "I'm not saying individual cases don't deserve sympathy." "Sympathy?" Crockett's voice rose slightly for the first time. "Mr. Musk, these aren't charity cases looking for sympathy. These are American citizens who pay taxes, who work hard, who contribute to society, and who need basic assistance to survive. They're not asking for billions in subsidies like your companies received. They're asking for enough food stamps to feed their kids and enough healthcare coverage to treat their disabilities." She leaned forward, her intensity building. "And here's what really gets me, Mr. Musk. You sit there worth $250 billion, having received over $10 billion in government support, and you have the audacity to call programs that feed hungry children wasteful spending. You call it budget discipline when what you're really saying is that billionaires deserve government support, but poor families don't." Crockett pulled out her phone and pulled up a tweet. "Let me read something you posted last week, Mr. Musk. Government spending is out of control. We need to cut benefits and make people more self-reliant." She looked up at him. "You posted that from your phone, probably from one of your multiple mansions, maybe from your private jet, all of which were made possible in part by the billions in government subsidies your companies received. And you're lecturing poor families about self-reliance?" The hypocrisy was now laid bare for everyone to see. Musk tried to respond. "Congresswoman, I've created hundreds of thousands of jobs with billions in government support." Crockett interjected. "And that's fine, Mr. Musk. I'm not saying your company shouldn't receive government contracts or that we shouldn't incentivize clean energy. What I'm saying is you can't take billions in taxpayer money and then turn around and call it wasteful when that same money goes to feed hungry kids or house homeless veterans." She gathered her documents, preparing for her final question. "Here's what I want Americans watching this to understand. When billionaires like Mr. Musk talk about government waste, they're not talking about the billions in subsidies going to profitable corporations. They're not talking about the tax loopholes that let the wealthy pay lower effective tax rates than school teachers. They're not talking about the government contracts awarded to companies that sometimes fail to deliver. Her voice was strong now, clear, prosecutorial. No, when they talk about government waste, they mean food for hungry children. They mean health care for sick people. They mean housing for families living in their cars. That's what they consider waste. Helping people who actually need help instead of enriching people who are already rich. Crockett looked directly at Musk and delivered her final, devastating question. So tell me, Mr. Musk, when did making billions excuse letting millions go hungry? When did accumulating more wealth than you could spend in 1,000 lifetimes justify cutting food assistance to families who are struggling to make it through the month? When did your comfort become more important than their survival? The room was absolutely silent. Musk opened his mouth, closed it, looked down at his notes, then back up. That's not, you're mischaracterizing. His usual eloquence had completely abandoned him. The man who could command a stage and sell a vision of Mars colonization couldn't answer a simple moral question about why his billions mattered more than children eating. Crockett didn't wait for him to compose himself. Mr. Chairman, I yield back my time. But I want to submit for the record the details of Mr. Musk's company's federal subsidies alongside the average benefits received by families in the programs he's advocating we cut. I think the comparison will be instructive for the American people. The hearing continued, but everyone knew the moment was over. Within minutes, clips were spreading across every platform. Crockett destroys Musk trended worldwide. The video of her final question, when did making billions excuse letting millions go hungry, was viewed tens of millions of times. Progressive organizations called it the perfect encapsulation of America's warped priorities. Even some conservative commentators admitted, grudgingly, that she'd made a point worth considering. Musk predictably took to Twitter later that day to complain that he'd been ambushed and that Crockett didn't understand economics. But he notably never answered her actual question. He never explained why his companies deserved billions while families deserved cuts. He never addressed the fundamental hypocrisy she'd exposed, that government spending was only wasteful when it helped poor people. The bigger question remained hanging over American politics. Would tech billionaires ever actually be held accountable for their hypocrisy? Would voters connect the dots between massive subsidies for the wealthy and cuts to programs for the poor? Or would billionaires like Musk continue to receive billions in taxpayer support while lecturing struggling families about self-reliance? Crockett had laid out the facts, exposed the hypocrisy, and asked the question that made millions of Americans think differently about who really benefits from government spending. Whether that moment of clarity would translate into actual change, whether the system that enriched billionaires while nickel and diming the poor would actually be reformed, remained to be seen. But at least now, thanks to 7 minutes of questioning from a congresswoman from Texas, millions of Americans understood exactly what was happening. And that understanding, Crockett believed, was the first step toward demanding something better. If this breakdown of how Jasmine Crockett exposed the staggering hypocrisy of Elon Musk, criticizing programs for poor families while his companies received over $10 billion in government subsidies, made you rethink how we talk about government spending, hit that like and subscribe button. Comment below and tell us, do you think tech billionaires will ever be held accountable for this double standard? Share this with anyone who needs to understand that when billionaires talk about cutting government waste, they never mean the billions going to them. Your engagement helps spread the truth. So thanks for watching, and we'll catch you in the next one.